also have something else related to the Texas track stabbing. Let's get into it, shall we?
Thanks for joining us here on WFA Plus. I'm Chris Sadeghi, and we are going to take you inside the hearing, the bond hearing for Carmelo Anthony that happened on Monday morning. There's a lot of public interest on this case. There were no cameras allowed inside the courtroom. So joining me are Jovan Paniker and Brittany Moncrief. The three of us were inside that courtroom, and we're here to really take you through what was said, what you were not able to see here because of the ban on cameras. We are going to take you from before the hearing, everything that happened during, and then everything that happened after, and then we have the raw interviews with the DA, the defense attorney, and also the NAACP. I want to start before the hearing. Jovan, you covered Collin County a lot. You've covered a lot of cases at that courthouse. Can you compare the security detail for yesterday's hearing compared to others that you've covered?
So I've been covering Collin County for 12 years, covered some high-profile cases in Collin County, now court trials in Collin County. We had the Grace Ford murder case, Paul who was killed. We had Christina Morris, first missing, then later found dead, that murder case, and then the Billy Shamir case. That also had some Collin County connections as well. So this was a bond hearing, and normally bond hearings happen within minutes. And it's usually a stack of papers, and the judge goes through them and says, bond approved for this amount, and they go through.
Again, only thing I'm doing is just giving y'all the information. So I will be talking, but the talking will be minimal, so y'all can understand what's going on.
A lot of them all on Monday, and they happen, like I said, within minutes. This was not the case, right? We had a setup, we had a media plan. They had a plan for all the media to get there early. There was security. There were 8 to 10 officers, 8 to 10 deputies from the Collin County Sheriff's Department. There we had to go through 2 sets of metal detectors to get into this bond hearing, very unlike what I normally see.
Yeah, and Brittany, the two families, the Metcalf family and the Anthony family, one thing I observed is the deputies that were there that Jovan mentioned, they had a plan to make sure the families were on different sides of the courtroom and also leaving the courtroom when it was done. One went after the other to prevent any kind of conflict.
I want to know, have you made this mistake with your holster? And by mistake, I mean, did you get a holster that's uncomfortable so you don't carry all the time?
One went after the other to prevent any kind of conflict.
Absolutely, they had pretty much, it was like a pretty strict schedule. Even when we were waiting in the lobby area right outside the courtroom, we saw Anthony's family be escorted into a side room. And around 8:30 is when they decided to let media in, and then at exactly like 8:40, that's when the family started going in. And even when we went into the courtroom, we filed in one by one, and they made sure each seat was filled. Media in the back, we sat right behind Metcalf's family, and then on the opposite side was Anthony's family, the Anthony family.
So once everybody was inside the courtroom, the first thing we were looking for was when Carmelo Anthony was brought into the courtroom. Was there anything about him, his appearance that you observed, or the reaction in the courtroom when he entered?
So before we get to that, I wanted to mention that there were no, as you said, no cameras inside the courtroom, which is normal for Collin County, right? What's also normal for Collin County is you're not even allowed to have cameras in and around the court, in and around the courtroom. So the only place where you could have cameras was in the lobby. So all the photographers were out in the lobby, the reporters were out near the courtroom. So we all get escorted in, and there's always this it gets really quiet as soon as the defendant walks in. And in this case, it's Carmelo Anthony, a 17-year-old kid, and he's in a yellow jumpsuit. He's handcuffed, and he's walking in, and it gets really quiet because the families are set. Families are on opposite sides of the courtroom. The media's in the back, and it gets really quiet as soon as he walks in, and then he looks straight at the dais.
And Brittany, did you observe any emotion or movement or action? From my vantage point, it looked like for pretty much the duration of the hearing, he was pretty stoic, very straightforward.
Absolutely, the whole time, just straightforward. We didn't see him turn to his family, the other family, nothing at all. One thing that we did notice, though, was Austin Metcalf, his mother, immediately, right before the hearing even began, you could see her kind of hunched over and someone there kind of comforting her. So it appears as though she might have been crying or pretty emotional during that time. But when Carmelo Anthony came in, like Jovan said, it was pretty much quiet, all eyes on him, and he just kept looking straight ahead.
So then Judge Angela Tucker enters the courtroom, and she began the hearing really by pointing out the unique nature of this bond hearing. Some of the things we talked about, the public interest, some not so great things that the general public is doing, the impact they're having on this hearing. Jovan, her pregame speech, if you want to call it that, was very interesting. And also, that's something from my experience covering courts that you don't always get from a judge being that upfront, that right away.
She set the tone very early, and she started off by saying, listen, my office has been inundated by emails and calls from the public who are interested in this case. And I need you to understand that I don't have any personal connections with anybody involved in this case. And she also made sure to mention, which is something that's smart that a lot of judges do, mentions that, one, I don't have any connection, and also I've been randomly assigned for this bond hearing, which is the way Collin County, and I'm assuming a lot of counties do it. Judge Angela Tucker, who has been there for close to, I think, 14, she's been there since 2012 in the 199. Okay, so she's very seasoned. She knows what she's doing. She says, I was randomly assigned this bond hearing. It's very likely when they go through the cycle of judges, it's the administrative judge of Collin County who decides who the next judge is to take on the next matter. It's very likely she may not get the trial if it goes to trial, or any of the pre-trial stuff that happens. So she made it very upfront that I was randomly assigned this bond hearing.
And part of that transparency, I don't know if it was what you were about to mention, Brittany, but she made clear that the Metcalf family divorce proceedings,
Yes.
she was very upfront about that she did not know the Metcalfs at the time, didn't even know that this was going to be her case. I think she said just last week she learned.
Yeah.
So she got it all out there on the table because she does want to head off any ideas of conspiracy or anything that the public might read into it as being any kind of conflict.
Absolutely. She said she just learned that she was assigned to the case last Monday. And as Jobin said, she went through the whole process of how judges are assigned to the cases. And as you mentioned, she talked about the Metcalf's family, the divorce that Austin Metcalf's family went through back in 2016. And she mentioned how she had no direct connection with that hearing, with that proceeding, and how it was actually handled in auxiliary court. So she laid it all out, no conflicts of interest, and even when it was time to talk about those who might be coming to the stand or speaking, she looked through those names, and also made a note to say, hey, I know no one, I have no connection, never had any contact with anyone that has been listed before us in the court.
So then we finally got to the bond hearing. This was not an evidentiary hearing. It wasn't about the incident itself. We didn't hear anything about this. This was solely about whether or not Carmelo Anthony could post bond if he, by posting bond, would be insured to return for his court dates, and then also that he didn't pose any threat to the public if he were to be released from jail on bond. So the one witness we heard that was called to the witness stand was Carmelo's father. Jobin, just take us through some of his testimony, your takeaways from what he had to say on the
Yeah,
stand.
I mean, you can tell he was nervous getting up on the stand. This is not something that people are used to doing, right? And so you can tell he was nervous at the onset, and then ultimately, when the defense is asking questions to, and his name is Andrew Anthony, right? He speaks to the fact that Carmelo has 3 younger siblings. He speaks to Carmelo being a straight A, B student, a captain of the football team and the track team. The defense is trying to tell us who Carmelo Anthony is, because a lot of what people have seen at this point are the pictures that we show through our coverage, and so the defense is trying to lay this out, because ultimately this is a bond hearing, right? The defense last week put in an application, it's a motion to reduce the bond. The bond was set at $1 million. I looked at the bond application that the defense put out, and there was no amount that the defense wanted in that moment. Now we hear later from the defense attorney, Mike Howard, that they wanted it dropped to $150,000. And so now the defense is now supposed to bring experts.
Be back in a second.
To sort of speak to who Carmelo is.
And part of his testimony, in addition to who his son is and his background, was his family's ability to pay the bond, which Andrew Anthony mentioned that he's had to take a leave from work since this happened. That's obviously income that his family doesn't have. Brittany, what was your takeaway from him explaining kind of his family's situation since this happened?
Right. Andrew Anthony actually talked about, how he is the sole, breadwinner of the family. His wife, he said, is a stay-at-home mom. As you mentioned, it's a family with 4 children, and Carmelo being the oldest. And so that leave of absence, he said, during that period, he's not receiving any income while he takes his leave. And the main reason for taking it, of course, with everything going on with the entire situation, but also his family, he says, has received lots of threats. And out of safety, they're probably going to have to move to a new home. And so when you factor in those different costs, his argument was, we can't afford to pay this bond.
These questions, if I may add, these questions are very specific to a bond hearing. You only hear these kinds of questions about your financial ability to pay something only comes up in a bond hearing. These are not facts or evidence in the actual murder case.
And it was also interesting that one of the managers from one of Carmelo Anthony's jobs, because we learned that he works too, one of the managers was there. In fact, there was a list of witnesses the defense said would be willing to testify. We only heard from his father, but the defense said they'd all be willing to testify more or less to the same thing. The fact that he had that much support in the courtroom, I guess that was something that was also a defense strategy.
That's one of the bond factors, right? One of the bond factors is that this is the judge's decision into reducing the bond. It goes back to the tie to the community. Does Carmelo Anthony have a tie to the community? And so when you bring all these people who are willing to take the stand to vouch for Carmelo Anthony and say, I can vouch for him, I can vouch for if he is placed on house arrest, I can vouch for him that he's going to stay at home,
Carmelo, and he talked about, like you mentioned, he had 2 jobs, working at Foot Locker, I believe, for 2 years, and then also at HEB in Frisco. And his manager at Foot Locker was there and was ready to testify if he needed to, and then also his coach, his football coach for his position that he played, was also there in the courtroom, and his girlfriend and some other family members who were there in support.
One of the bond factors the judge mentioned also is criminal history. Carmelo Anthony had none, but like his trial, the prosecution gets a chance to cross-examine. So once they had a chance to question Andrew Anthony, it seemed like they were inquisitive about this fundraiser. And they actually had some numbers at the time. I think they said it was like $412,000. And it's almost as if they were questioning the family's inability to meet the $1 million bond because of that fundraiser. Jobin, what were some of the things that you remember, not only the prosecution asking about, but the father's answers?
Yeah, so Bill Bursky is a very talented first DA for Collin County. He was already in Dallas County as the first DA under Susan Hawk. Now he's up there with the DA, who was also in the courtroom, Greg Willis. So Bill Bursky asked the question, if you have this much money in your fundraising page, why aren't you bonding them out now? And Andrew Anthony answered that question, and he says, well, we don't have full control over that fundraising page. And so that's what sort of precipitated that discussion, because ultimately this comes down to your ability to pay the 10% surety bond that will allow him to come home on house arrest.
Yeah, and Brittany, the defense, and kind of their rebuttal to that was pointing out, well, it's not simply a bond you're paying with that money. That money is for a lot of things. As we just mentioned, the father not being able to work. They mentioned that they're going to have to pay for their own investigators as they try to get evidence or information and evidence about the incident, what happened. So the defense team is not cheap by any means, and that was something that seemed like the defense was trying to hammer home. The prosecution really inquisitive about that fundraiser, though, and also the access the family had to it.
Absolutely, and one of the points that Mike Howard, the defense attorney, brought up was there is that 10% rule of the bond where you only pay 10% of what that bond is. But his argument was that when you have cases that are of high profile as this, sometimes bondsmen can increase their costs. So that 10% rule may even be more than that. And that was part of the argument that Mike Howard was making as well when Andrew Anthony was on the stand.
Any other observations from Andrew Anthony's testimony? Something we may not have mentioned yet, something that stuck out, because it was about a 90-minute hearing altogether. It was not as quick as maybe some other bond hearings. Just anything else from the testimony or from the two sides that you remember that sticks out there?
Well, I mean, I did notice that the prosecution or the state did mention, listen, he's never been convicted of another crime, but there was an altercation that occurred on campus, and that happened in February.
February 6th, I believe, was the date.
And so that was interesting that came up in this document.
And they did not provide any details. They mentioned that something had happened at school, but Brittany just kind of hung there. We didn't get any more information on that.
Right. Andrew, Carmelo Anthony's dad, he mentioned that law enforcement wasn't involved in that particular altercation. Again, we don't know what that altercation was, who it involved, but he did mention that law enforcement wasn't involved in that. Another thing that stood out too, the prosecution, the DA's office actually presented documents from the previous representation that Carmelo Anthony had, and that document was asking about, had a line in there about the Give, Send, Go, referring back to the GoFundMe and ways that people were donating. And he had Andrew Anthony basically initial the amounts and the change in amounts. He said the goal was changed to $500,000 to be raised, and that's when we learned that currently it's $400,000 change. Had Andrew Anthony initial that change had happened.
Yeah, so we got a little bit of taste of how these fundraisers work and just how much access the family has right away. It doesn't sound like, at least from Andrew Anthony's testimony, that it's something where they can just go to the ATM right away and withdraw money. There's a process with these online fundraisers. Okay, so the judge's ruling, we know that she lowered the bond from $1 million to $250,000. Jobin, you already mentioned that the defense team was actually asking for it to be $150,000. So she goes a little bit more than halfway to them. Still not exactly what they wanted. But again, before making her ruling, she made clear that this was not any kind of statement on guilt or innocence. We are strictly talking about bond.
And she mentions the bond factors. Those bond factors are important to recognize. Age of the defendant, U.S. citizenship, whether this person has committed a crime in the past, and also the tie to the community. Right? That question kept coming up. And so also, what's interesting is with these bond hearings, the judge has to weigh several things on top of the factors. The bond ultimately is put on someone because you don't want somebody sitting in jail the entire time until they go to trial. You want to give them the opportunity to somewhat live a normal life, right, until their trial happens. So this is to ensure, one, the public safety, but also ensure compliance with a court order. You should be coming to court as you're told, when you're told, if your trial happens. And so the judge wanted to make it very clear what this bond hearing is really about.
My Spectrum services help simplify my day. It helps our business just run really smoothly.
Yeah, and I saw some of the comments online saying that, oh, why are they setting him free? The conditions of the bond, I wouldn't necessarily say he's totally free. He's under house arrest. He does have an ankle monitor, and anytime he leaves the house, he has to get the court's permission. So, Brittany, there's a lot of conditions on this release.
Absolutely, and he also has to report to the court every Friday. And the judge made it clear, if you violate any of these restrictions, then she was going to put him back in jail. And anytime that he meets with his lawyer, that all has to be approved ahead of time by the court. They have to be aware of his whereabouts at all times, and an adult has to be with him at all times as well. And something else that Judge Tucker, Angela Tucker, mentioned is because we heard the DA's office say that the bond should impact the quality of life lost. That was the argument that came from the DA's office. And Judge Tucker, before she gave her ruling, she stated that she disagreed because she said that, one, that's not the law, and she also mentioned that there's no replacement for a life loss, and that also went behind some of her decision.
That was the state's argument, right? Like, the bond amount should reflect the loss of life. And she shut that down very quickly. She's like, that is not a bond factor. And so that's why it gets reduced to $250,000.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, onlookers who are watching this case closely, might want to look at this particular hearing as part of the trial, but the judge reiterated many times this was about bond, and they're only trying to ensure, A, that he returns for those court dates, and B, that there is no threat to the public. Any defendant is going to be entitled to some kind of bond if those factors are met. Did you notice any kind of reaction anywhere in the courtroom, either from the Metcalf family, the Anthony family, when that decision was made?
Not during the decision. Now, again, we had mentioned that Austin Metcalf's mother was hunched over. Someone was consoling her from the back, right? And so we did see a lot of that during this hearing, but nothing particular. We did notice that ultimately they had to stand up Carmelo Anthony, and the judge had to ask him point blank, do you understand these bond factors? And do you also understand these restrictions that are now placed on you? And all of his answers were one-word answers, right? And again, as you said, he was very stoic, and so I can imagine this is all a shock to him. He's 17 years old. One day he's at a track meet, and the next moment he is in jail, right? And I'm trying to remember the actual wording that the judge said. You can either be in a box, or you can stay at home.
You can be in a box here, or you can stay at home.
Yeah.
That was, I think, what she said, or the gist of it. Certainly, it's not one of those situations where he's going to return to the life he had before this incident. In fact, going back to what you were saying about the one-word answers, I believe the only words Carmelo Anthony spoke during the entire hearing was he said his name to identify himself, and then everything after that was yes, yes, ma'am. He understood what was being presented before him with these bond conditions. So the hearing ended, I think it was about 90 minutes long, and then I want to kind of revisit what we were talking about earlier when it was time for the families to leave. The deputies going back to that security, they had a plan to get everyone out without any kind of conflicts passing by. They wanted to make sure that these families had enough safety and distance between them.
As it always works, the defendant leaves first, right? So the defendant has already stood up, answered the questions about the bond conditions that he accepts, right? And he is escorted out into the room, out of the room, into what is sort of like an inner cell that the Collin County courthouse has. And so he'll move into there, and I was expecting him to sort of look over at family. He didn't do that. He walked straight into the room with a deputy behind him, right? They closed the door. That's when the bailiff of that court announces, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do this process. It's very regimented, right? And it started with the families leaving first, right?
That was leaving first. I believe Anthony's family left first, and then Metcalf's family filed out after, and then media left right after that. And the other thing too is, during the year when the judge gave her ruling, you didn't hear anyone no sigh of relief. It was just quiet, And that's how it was too. Also, leaving out when we were escorted out, you didn't hear it. There was no conversation between either side or anything like that. It was just
despite a lot of the outside noise that we've been hearing on this case, there was no contention at all in between these families, right? And so they had the Anthony family escorted out. They waited about a minute or two, and then they had the Metcalf family leave. And then the Metcalf family, we believe, went downstairs. They probably all convened in a room. The Anthony family probably all convened in a room, and then they had the media come out.
Yeah, and let's paint the scene of the courtroom itself. It's not a huge courtroom, at least not seating-wise. Would you say there's about 50 seats or so, and every seat was full? There was limited space for the media. I know some media members who were not able to get inside wanted to be there, but this is not a big courtroom by any means. It'll be interesting to see that if this case does go to trial, if seating is expanded given the interest in this case. But this is a tiny courtroom and not a lot of space for onlookers.
So we were kind of like shoulder to shoulder.
If this goes to trial, there are much larger rooms in the Collin County Courthouse that can seat up to 80 to 100 people. But no, this sat about 50 people. people, and as I understand, there was one defense attorney who I know in Collin County who was trying to get in just to witness some of this stuff. Again, no cameras inside, so we really want to sort of see how things play out. And he was not allowed in. It was just the families, it was just the state, the defense, their main attorneys, and then the media.
It'll be interesting to see if it does reach that point. And Brittany, you mentioned it about if this case does go to trial, it could be a totally different judge, totally different courtroom. So that's something we will be watching. So now after the hearing's over, everybody's left the courtroom. We're going to get to the interviews here in just a second. But can y'all tell me, I went outside to do a live shot. What happened in those immediate moments after the hearing ended?
Well, immediately following after, the media kind of came together in the lobby area, but we were waiting to see which attorneys will come out, who would be able to speak with us, and then we didn't see Carmelo Anthony's parents leave. We saw them when they came in to the courtroom earlier that morning, but we didn't see them when they left. So we're not entirely sure when they left, or if they came out of a different entrance or waited a while. But we didn't see them come out. And then first who came out was Mike Howard, and I know you had a chance to go over and interview with him.
It's always a massive scrum. Like as soon as the hearing ends, right, and you're hoping the DA talks. The DA normally does not talk because he doesn't even have the case yet. Greg Willis, who was the district attorney for Collin County, said, "I don't have the case, so I don't have a whole lot to say." Is the first thing he said. So he walks up, and then there's about, I'd say, 10 to 12 cameras there, and we're hoping for him to have some insight on how he feels about this bond being reduced. And he said point blank, I don't have the case yet. We're still waiting on the case from the Frisco Police. So the Frisco Police Department files the report, and then the Collin County DA executes that report.
In case you're coming into this video, all this here is everything about the bond
When I
hearing.
talked with the DA last week, he said, we're hoping to have it within the next couple of weeks. He's going to be patient. These are things that need to be thorough. Frisco Police Department is also going to want to be thorough about this.
Everything you're
So,
hearing
that's
now
what
is
he
all
mentioned,
about the
is,
bond hearing.
One or 2 minutes that he talked with the media.
Yeah, and defense attorney Mike Howard, who just took lead counsel over the weekend, I believe Friday is when he took over that role as lead counsel for the defense team. He came out, I was out there, I saw everybody scrummed around him.
Yeah.
Jobin, as you mentioned, it can be a scrum, a lot of cameras. We have his interview that I want to listen to right now, and we'll discuss after we listen to his comments.
Sorry about the ads.
Self-defense is protection that applies to each and every one of us. There are two sides to every story. And Carmelo is a set of...
Sir, you say that this is self-defense. You can sit there and say this is self-defense all you want. We need videotape of what happened. You claiming it's self-defense. Show us the proof that it was self-defense. That's all we're asking. You claiming it was self-defense. Show us the proof.
18-year-old kid and an excellent student. He's the captain of his track team. He's the captain of his football team. And prior to this, what was on his mind was what college he was going to go to. This is a tragedy all the way around for both families. Rushing to judgment, trial by public perception and trial by media is not how we ensure justice is done. We are confident that after a full investigation, that the truth will come out. Thank you. Well, the fact of the matter is, like I said, there's two sides to every story, and we've only heard one side. In any criminal case, the police investigate, and the defense is always far behind that. And so it is a one-sided investigation to this point, and even that investigation is still ongoing. So to say that it happened this way or that way is just not accurate at this point. All of the facts are going to come out, and that's why our system of justice requires that we keep our minds open and we let the facts come out as they are after a full investigation. I anticipate that he will be able to make bond. I can't speak to how quickly that will go. Funds, the funds that have been raised are not quick to come out. And then, there's obviously a process to the release process once bond is posted.
The big question that a lot of people have is why is this young man armed on school property?
That's an understandable question, but it's not something that, frankly, we're prepared to even go into. This is something that I know the police and the prosecution want to get it right, and want to have a full and fair investigation, and so do we. So it would be irresponsible for me or them at this point to start saying, this is what happened, this is why, anything. So I understand that's a big question. It's going to be a big question, and it's something that we will find out, and we ask that the public, as hard as it is, withhold judgment and let both of these families have justice, that let both of these young men, the Metcalf family and the memory of who they've lost, but also Carmelo, have a fair and full justice process. Yeah, I feel it's fair. Bond, as the judge said, is not supposed to be an instrument of oppression. It's not supposed to keep people in jail. It's not supposed to punish. It's supposed to ensure that a person shows up to court, complies with all conditions, and it's supposed to keep the community safe. So this is a large and substantial bond, and the judge has, I think, rightly imposed reasonable conditions that will ensure both Carmelo and the Anthony family's safety, but also the safety of the community.
What was Carmelo's reaction today? He was very talkative towards you. Like, how has jail, I guess, been so far for this teenager, and did he look on suicide watch or things like that?
I honestly can't speak to Carmelo's reaction because I was so focused on the hearing and what was going on and what the judge was saying. I think we have to all remember Carmelo is a 17-year-old kid who's never been in any sort of trouble before. If you could just put yourself in his shoes, this is a scary, bewildering process, and I can't even imagine what was going through his head, just as I'm sure I can't imagine what was going through the heads of the Metcalf family. So, this is something that is new to all of them and incredibly trying.
So the people who want to know, why were you selected? I mean, what is your experience? I mean,
I can't speak as to why I was selected. In any case, it's important to have an attorney that you connect with, that you feel has the right amount of experience and the right investment in the case. And I'm not speaking to anybody else. I just know that that's important in any case. Yeah, I'm not going to speak for them at this point, but I think you can imagine the press coverage on this case has been immense, and the online and public reaction has been immense, and unfortunately, as is common in our culture, especially lately, the vitriol and the public reaction one way or the other has been intense, and threats and talk of race war and all kinds of insanity isn't good for, obviously, the Anthony family. It's not good for the Metcalf family. It's not good for the peace and safety of our community. So I would ask, and I know both sides would ask, that the temperature on this be allowed to come down. That the media, you guys have a job to do, and I understand that everyone does, but at the same time, we just ask everyone in the public and everywhere to let this process play out fairly and fully for both sides. Thank you, guys.
We don't just make promise, we deliver. We always value user experience and believe that the cleanliness and the safety are the most important aspects. So he had a lot to say there, but I want to start with that last part because I think that's the one thing all sides agree on. Prosecution, defense, and the judge, they would like to see the temperature turned down on this.
There's been a lot of noise, right, on the periphery, and a lot of it, none of that stuff should affect the criminal justice system, and what ultimately will be happening with Carmelo Anthony. So I think it was important. You're hearing from a very seasoned defense attorney who is wanting to make sure that all of that noise does not affect what is happening with his client.
Yeah, and he was asked the question about the knife, and he obviously did not give an answer, which to me, I think he's trying to say there's still a lot of discovery to be made. They're not ready to try this case right now. So if there's people wanting to know those answers about why, there's still a lot of investigating to be done with this case.
Absolutely. This is still it's an ongoing investigation. There's a lot that we still don't know that law enforcement that they're trying to work through as well. And so until that information comes in, we saw, like as you mentioned, both sides saying, let this kind of play out, let the facts come in, let the facts speak for itself before this response that we're seeing from the public. And even the judge mentioned that there was a lot of untruths that has been circulating around, and so they want both families to be able to have a fair proceeding when it comes to this tragedy that took place, versus having outside opinions influence anything or any judgment in this case.
If I could add one thing, I think it was interesting that Defense Attorney Mike Howard, at the very first thing that he said, his opening statement to the media is laying this groundwork for self-defense, right? He said that right off the bat. And that has been sort of a narrative that has been said over the last couple of weeks. And he illustrated it here in the very opening comment to the media.
So we heard from defense attorney Mike Howard. We also heard from the Collin County District Attorney Greg Willis. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
What's important is what's next. Frisco PD will be finishing up their investigation. They will submit the case to my office. We will review it and ultimately present it to a grand jury. And so that's what's next. That's really much, it's pretty much all I can say right now. We do our speaking as far as the facts go in the courtroom. Many of you were in there, so you understand what was said. But this is a terrible tragedy for our entire, not just Frisco, but Collin County community. One family has suffered a permanent loss. It's the most unnatural thing for a parent to lose their child. It's permanent, it's profound, it's certainly premature, and it's the hardest thing that a human being can go through is to lose their child. The Anthony family has had a different kind of loss, but a loss nonetheless. The judge has made her call, and we look forward to continuing the process and looking forward to reviewing all the facts of the case that Frisco PD is coming up with and presenting to a grand jury. What we're concerned about as prosecutors is justice, truth, and accountability. And so we will go where the facts lead us. Thank you so much.
Could you speak about the security and the vitriol and just the safety even for the judge and your officer?
Well, this has definitely rocked our entire community. And so it has struck a nerve in the community. And it's hard for everybody to be level-headed at a time like this. So that's where we come in. It's our job to be level-headed, to be fact-based, and to follow the truth wherever it leads. Thank you so much.
So maybe not as much to say as defense attorney Mike Howard, but a lot of the same sentiment. They're going to follow the law. They're going to try to stay level-headed, and that goes back to what I was saying, speaking to just everybody take a breath and let's get this right one way or the other.
Absolutely. And one thing you mentioned was, how this has rocked the entire community. And there's other people that may not be in the Frisco community that's also watching. We even saw a woman who traveled 3 hours just to be there. And when we asked her why, she said she just wanted to see a fair process. She wanted to see how everything played out. So this has really gained a lot of eyes and attention from people all over.
Greg Willis is a very seasoned district attorney as well, so he knows what he's doing, and you can tell he's very careful with his words, because he has to be careful. You don't want an administrative judge saying, well, after what you said, I don't know if we can have this trial, if it goes to trial, in Collin County. So he was very smart about the words he was using. When we talked with Greg Willis last week, I asked him, what are you going to do to make sure that this case stays in Collin County? He says everything. This crime happened in Collin County. The people of Collin County should have a say. And so he's going to be careful at the end of the bond hearing, where we're not even talking about the facts or the evidence of the case at all, to discuss, where the next step is. And the next step is really making sure that they get the case. They have not gotten the case yet. It's still Frisco police.
And we're going to get to those next steps in just a moment, but I want to ask you guys about the moment Carmelo Anthony was able to make that bond and walk from the jail. He was in a suit, not the jumpsuit that we saw him in the courtroom. I believe both of you were still there at the time. I think this was around the 4 o'clock hour. Just what was that atmosphere like when he was able to walk from the jail, get in the car, and go home?
A source with the Collin County Sheriff's Department did tell me that, from the time someone comes in and posts his bond and allows for Carmelo Anthony to come out, it'll take about, on a good day, about 2 hours. But because of all the bond conditions that are here, we have the ankle monitoring, you got to figure out GPS, you got to figure out all those things. That's going to take some time. You got to contact all the people that, the family has claimed would vouch for Carmelo, and those people all have to be written down. So that takes about 4 to 5 hours. So right at 4 o'clock, before lunch, 4 o'clock, it's probably about 4:10, 4:15. An SUV pulls up, and we know that, Carmelo Anthony is about to come out, and we got word from the source that, hey, this is about to happen in the next 10, 20 minutes here. So we all just waited just outside the jail. The way the Collin County Sheriff's Department is sort of set up, you have the Sheriff's Department on one side, and then you have the jail really just opposite it. And so those two doors are now facing each other. So you got a whole line of cameras placed right in front of the jail door, because that is the only way he can come out. And so when he came out, there was mad rush of people heading out there, and then we knew at some point something was going to happen.
And Brittany, from what I could tell, I was not there, but I saw the video. It looked like reporters were yelling questions, but no answer from Carmelo Anthony. I'm sure his attorney told him not to. That would seem a wise thing for an attorney to advise a client.
Yeah, we actually saw some of the family members that were in the courtroom were also out there waiting for him to come out. Some had their phones out, some wore shirts, what it appears to have his picture on the front. And there were some other people that were kind of out in the parking lot too, also waiting. And when he came out, as you mentioned, he had like a gray suit, purple tie. Again, the same look that he had in the courtroom was the same that he kept coming out. And he just looked straight ahead. He came out with Next Generation Action Network, and they walked out with him, escorting him to the car. And he just kept looking straight, no eyes looking anywhere else, didn't show any emotion or anything like that, just going directly to the car.
Okay, as for what's next in this case, Jobin, I want you to talk us through it because I know you're familiar with the grand jury process and I know you've been talking to some of the players in this case. So what happens next? Where do we go from here in this case?
So the timeline can fluctuate. You know, a lot can depend on availability of court services, availability of judges. Ultimately, there'll be a grand jury that will, whether either no bill Carmelo Anthony or they indict Carmelo Anthony. And this could happen, we're being told, possibly over the next 3 months, what the source is telling me, over the next, this is going to be a high priority case. It's not something that's going to be placed on the back burner. I'm assuming the DA is going to want to, as soon as he gets the case from the Frisco Police Department, will move pretty quickly to get this grand jury, get this in front of a grand jury, and then that grand jury will ultimately make a decision. And that is, again, this is all, the word is a shroud of secrecy. I mean, the grand jury has always been that way. And so we're being told this will take several months, and we'll be looking into June, July before we have possibly a grand jury decision.
Yeah, and we want to make clear, you mentioned it there, that's the way grand juries operate. It's not something that's out in the open. It's always behind closed doors. We don't necessarily know the time frame of when they're meeting or what cases they're hearing.
And we have to understand that I think that the terminology is you can indict a ham sandwich, right? The burden is not nearly as high to indict someone.
Right.
The question becomes, is there enough here to put this person on trial? And are the charges reflective of, is there enough information here to reflect the charges that have been cast on this person?
Right. An indictment is not a conviction. A bond, being released on bond, is not a statement on guilt or innocence. Yeah. So this is the process. This is the way it works. And we are definitely going to be following this case. We wanted to explain to our viewers, since we know there is a lot of public interest, how this system is working, making sure that the system's working the way it's supposed to work, and explaining what happened in that hearing, since obviously cameras did not be inside. But we have the full interviews that you just saw that you can watch anytime on WFA+, plus also interviews with the Metcalf family. We talked to them shortly after his death. So all of that can be seen on WFA+. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Jobin Honecker and Brittany Moncrief. We are going to follow this case very closely, keep you up to date on any developments. Thank you for joining us.